Welcome, and thank you for being here. I couldn't be happier to introduce the speakers for tonight. Before I do, I just want to make sure that I take a minute to thank all of them and all of you who are alumni who are watching tonight, who were part of the Uprising, for raising your voices and making the demands that have really changed virtually every domain in the college and continue to create change. I'm honored to introduce those who were there at the time, who assumed leadership positions. And I also want to say just something about the power of listening. So what the Uprising showed us is the power of people raising their voices, doing the kind of analysis, sharing the pain of having felt invisible and isolated, pointing out that the college had not been ready to receive the students that we brought to campus. But in addition to raising voices, making the case and creating change, there were also the hundreds of people, hundreds and hundreds who listened. And one of the things that I take with me about the Uprising is the power of both. Let me introduce some of our speakers, or all of our speakers now. They're going to talk about what happened 5 years ago on a Thursday, November 12th, what started as a 1-hour sit-in organized by 3 sophomores, including Katyana Dandridge, who's with us tonight, turned into a 4-day occupation of Frost's library and a demand for change at Amherst to make it the equitable, open, and inclusive institution that it has wanted and claimed it wanted to be. And among the leaders at that time are the person I'll introduce first, and that is Christine Rihanna Croasdaile, who graduated from Amherst in 2017 with a double major in Black Studies and Spanish, and who studied and did research in Cuba while she was here. She's currently a first-year law student at Howard University School of Law, where she's pursuing not only a JD, but an MBA. She's concentrating in entertainment and intellectual property law and brand strategy, and Christine hopes to work with creatives of color after her graduate studies. Christine, welcome, and thank you for being here. Katyana Dandridge is a 2018 graduate of the college. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in Sexuality, Women's, and Gender Studies. Katyana is currently Director of Equity Programs and Operations at ArtUp, where she specializes in bringing the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion to arts and culture, program design, and implementation, to grant writing, and to creative placemaking. And Katyana is in Memphis. Bella Ito, who will join us later, is a senior, still a student here at Amherst, double majoring in Black Studies and Law. She's, Black Studies and Law, Jurisprudence, and Social Thought. Bella is a member of the women's lacrosse team, and she's the president of the Council of College Student Athletes of Color. She serves on the COVID-19 Response Task Force and also on the Anti-Racism Advisory Group. Bella is a class of 2021 senator on the AAS, and her LJST thesis explores themes of law and legality in the works of Toni Morrison. She intends to have a career in government and politics. Lola Fadulu graduated from Amherst in 2017 with a major in philosophy. After having a David Rosenblum Fellowship at the New York Times, she is now a writer, currently covering health in the DC region for the Washington Post. Lola is going to be moderating tonight's conversation. Amir Denzel Hall graduated in 2017 I will never forget his commencement address. Amir is a writer and interdisciplinary artist. He's studying fiction writing at New York University. Amir is also working closely with Amherst professor Sonia Clark on the forthcoming Book Solidarity Project, which is part of what we're supporting for our bicentennial celebration. Andrew Smith, class of 18, is a creative developer currently pursuing a master's degree in human-computer interaction at the University of Maryland. He's also working with Professor Sonia Clark on the Book Solidarity Project and is responsible for developing, for the 5-year anniversary and the bicentennial, an extraordinary website featuring the Uprising. And now let me turn things over to Lola.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to talk about Amherst Uprising. I'm surprised that it's already been 5 years, and I'm looking forward to hearing the reflections from the panelists. So I'd love to start with Katyana, because you organized the sit-in that morphed into Amherst Uprising. Could you tell us about how the sit-in came to be and sort of what was happening on other college campuses in the nation?
Yeah, thank you, Lola. So what initially happened that night, I think November 11th, 2015. So myself, Lorado Tefo, and Sanyu Takuramabude, sorry, we were taking a break from studying, and we were just, hanging out in Marsh House with some friends, and kind of just taking a moment to vent our frustrations about not only, the things that we were struggling with in classes and at Amherst, but taking some time to think about what was going on at the time at schools like Yale and Mizzou. They were currently in the middle of, at that time, they were in the middle of several racial injustice demonstrations. And it was just a hard thing to be able to see that from where we were, because we knew that, a lot of the things that they were feeling, we could relate to at Amherst. It just hadn't been necessarily addressed at that moment. And then also Lorado and Sanyu are both from South Africa. And at the time, there was I think it was called Fees Must Fall movement happening in South Africa by students who were protesting the rise of their college fees, tuition fees. And so it was something that was an inequitable raise that disproportionately affected Black students in South Africa. So they were feeling very kind of, just disjointed and not feeling great, because it was just something that was happening that they felt strongly about that was so far away from Amherst, and they felt kind of helpless at the moment. So we, were talking about it. And then Lorado and I at the time were also taking a class by Professor Anika Henderson called Bad Black Women. And one of the major topic of that course was transgression. And so what that means is we studied different texts and methods of transgressing space by Black women. So one of our major assignments in that class was to learn how to double Dutch, but not just learning how to double Dutch, we had to learn how to do it in public and in different unexpected places, so that we would become spectacles in each place and transgress space with this game that was, very near and dear to a lot of Black women's hearts. So we had been, studying the act of protest, of transgression. And so that background mixed with a lot of the things that we were feeling, Lorado and I had a conversation, and she was like, what can we do about this? What should we do? And then eventually the three of us decided that, okay, let's do a sit-in, or let's go and make posters and put them up or something like that. And honestly, we were very inspired by what the class before us had done, and the BSU leadership had done with the Black Lives Matter programming that they had the year before. So I was taking an art class at the time as well. So I had access to the art classroom, and I was like, okay, well guys, I got a lot of extra cardboard and markers and things like that. So let's just go make some signs, and we can text all our friends and tell them that we're doing this sit-in and frost, and just to bring people's attention and awareness to what was happening at the time, because even while it felt like a big deal to us, we knew that not every student on campus knew or could relate to what was happening everywhere else. And a lot of times students get stuck in the Amherst bubble, where they don't really consider how things outside our external factors are, affecting Black students. So we went in the art room, we were making the signs, and then we just so happened to run into a student from Hampshire, and she was, asking us about our signs and the sit-in, and she was like, that sounds awesome. Like, I want to go. I'll spread the word at Hampshire. We will come, and you guys should make a Facebook event. Like, we can really, make this something. And so that we were like, oh, wow, okay, we don't expect anyone to come, but we'll make the Facebook event and invite everyone that we know. So we did that. And then the next day came. We were all really nervous and shaking, but we thought, it'll probably be 20 people max sitting down in frost. And then we showed up to the library, and there were dozens and dozens of students, and we were just taken aback by the amount of support that people were showing, and that people really wanted to participate and, sit with us and just show that, Black students were not in this alone. And honestly, it definitely meant a lot to us that students were showing up for us, 3 Black women who wanted to, express ourselves about different racial injustices happening across the world. So yeah, the sit-in, we did not anticipate it to turn into the conversation that sparked Amherst Uprising, but I'm glad, that we had people like Christine and Amir who were able to help spark that conversation that eventually snowballed into the hours-long, event that we had that night. That is kind of like the crux of Amherst Uprising.
Yeah, I don't think many students realized what the sit-in would turn into. I remember I was editor-in-chief of the AC Voice at the time, one of our former campus publications, and I got there early, and I remember seeing people trickle in, and students were definitely affected by and moved by what they were seeing on other campuses, and connecting it to their experiences at Amherst. Christine, I know that for a lot of students, the moment that you spoke up toward the end of the sit-in is what transformed the sit-in into Amherst Uprising. And I'd love to hear you talk about what made you speak up in that moment. And I know it's been 5 years, but if you remember what you said and what that moment was like for you.
Thank you, Lola. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this evening. And as Lola said, yeah, just to think that it's been 5 years, time has truly flown, but I know that it's humbling and amazing to hear that what we did, 5 years ago is still living strong in the policies at Amherst and just in the practices at Amherst. And I think that that's so very important. So I was a junior, really a 1 foot in, 1 foot out, sort of, kind of, because as Biddy mentioned, I was about to pursue my spring semester abroad in Cuba. I had declared my double majors. I was ready to, take on this time. And I had taken classes and was so adamant about being a Black Studies and Spanish major and living in that intersection while at Amherst, because I saw that those were spaces where not just myself, I could see myself, but see other marginalized people and be able to speak about, who we are and what we stand for. I think at the time I had held a couple of leadership positions in the BSU as well. And as Katyana had mentioned, our BSU had stepped forward along with the MRC the year before to put together programming for Black Lives Matter, which at the time had actually been defaced on campus. And I remember being a sophomore at that time and sitting there and wondering, I made a decision, and a lot of us made a collective decision to come to Amherst because we thought it was a place that we would feel safe in speaking about who we are and how much our existence matters. And then to see that there was, people on campus that probably didn't feel the same, it scared me at one point, but it also emboldened me to know that what a lot of us took on as our purpose on campus was not for naught. So in seeing how that transpired the year prior, I wanted to, definitely support, Katyana, Lorado, and Sanyu in their endeavors, because I know how it felt when just the year prior, when, the national walkout happened, and I didn't expect that many people to come in front of Frost, and then seeing so many people come, but we didn't do anything with that fire that we had behind us. We stood there in solidarity, but we didn't take the time to look at ourselves as Amherst, not just the institution, but the people. And so when I sat there in the library and noticed that the same thing that happened the year before was almost about to transpire again, where we have so many people show that they care about such matters, but we don't actually have a conversation, I felt the need that, especially in Frost Library of all places, where people are constantly buzzing with conversation, that it should not be a time that we don't hold an honest conversation about how Amherst can take heed of what's going on in other spaces. So I remember, sitting next to one of my good friends, Kristen Washington, who's also class of 17, and she saw me just shaking in my seat. And she's like, "What is going on, Christine?" And I was like, I can't let this moment pass and not stand up and say, like, how can we sit here and say that we're sitting in solidarity, but we're not taking the mirror and looking it back at ourselves? Like, administration had came forth. We had everyone literally in the same space. So it could have been the perfect time to just say, like, let's not act like the incidents that occur at Mizzou and Yale are not similar to things that occur at Amherst. And she was like, so get up and say it. And so I got up and I was like, excuse me, I really just have to say something. Like, and I literally said what I just said for verbatim. Like, let's not act like the things that happen at Mizzou and the things that happen at Yale are not things that we're experiencing on a daily here at Amherst. And I remember, a lot of people were taken aback. You heard a little bit of uproar here and there, like whispers, and people were saying, yeah, like, I agree. And other people looked confused because that just wasn't their reality at Amherst. And in seeing that call forth other people to feel so comfortable enough to feel like they too could share what did that statement even mean to them. We heard some real stories that evening. We heard people being honest about what does it mean to be a Black student? What does it mean to be a Latino student? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a student that identifies as part of the LGBT community? What does it mean to be a student who comes from a socioeconomic background, but whose race maybe sometimes colors the way in which we think about how their experience at Amherst could be? Just thinking about all the different intersections and diversity that comes to Amherst, but how those things can be celebrated in certain spaces, but can also be a place where we find ourselves not able to truly acknowledge who we are. And so from there, people started getting up and sharing their stories. I remember vividly Amir just saying, like, this is the time, like, if we want something to be done with this time, then we need to ask of it. And so Dean Epstein comes forward and Amir says, like, this is college business too. Like, Biddy should be here to hear what it is that we're saying. And it was from that moment that I realized the power that and experiences that formed our time since coming in as freshmen, being students of color, being students from marginalized communities, people from the, as they call the peripheries and not the center folk, but those people who truly drove what it meant to be a part of a culture at Amherst, but were not being heard. It was nerve-wracking. It's definitely a space that showed me that courage is a thing. It's not something that is fleeting. And it also informed how I looked at the rest of my time being an Amherst student and what I wanted to encourage, students coming after me to know that they too, if they something that they want to stand up for, the college has made a decision to take you on as one of their students. But not only that, but to change the space as well, and to transform it into a space that you want to be a part of. And so if that is what I can tell you as an alum, but even then as an upper class student, to say, yeah, if that's something that you want, go for it. here are the people that you go to talk about it, then we know that change can come once you realize who are the people at play, but also what if your purpose aligns with theirs and you show it clearly, then change must come from it. I often say that Amherst's motto, like Terras Radiant, like bring light to the world. Like I think that Amherst Uprising was truly a moment that we shed light on Amherst itself, and brought our various lights that we were all so happy about being Amherst students. We actually allowed for all of them to shine in ways that may not always feel comfortable, but in ways that were necessary for certain changes to be made. But yeah.
See, and it's clear that you know, Kristen was a great friend who, you know, saw you shaking and encouraged you to what you said, to do something with the fire. And you mentioned that, you know, you speaking up led to an open discussion. It led to Biddy returning from her trip to Japan for college business. It led to a list of demands getting written. So at this moment, I would love if Amir could talk more about the atmosphere and what he felt as someone who, as Christine mentioned, you know, had the mic and was talking during and maybe while you're doing that, if Andrew could pull up some photos that he has as a part of his work archiving the event, that would be great for everyone to see.
Thank you. And thank you, Christine, for all that you were saying. I really resonated with what you said about Kristen and that role that she played as well. It's so important. Those people that can recognize the fire and recognize the thing boiling over and give you that word of encouragement and confirmation that you can do this, that you should do this. And I feel like so far from what Katyana has said and like what Christine has said, it's about an accumulation of these individual acts, right? Is these individual feelings that resonate with national and international movements and resistances. And it's the accumulation that makes the thing. It's Kristen giving Christine permission. It's Christine's voice within the space giving us all permission to say what we had to say. Yeah, like I'm shy. I don't be, I'm just kidding, I'm not shy. But in an activist sense, that was a very new space for me. I come from Trinidad and Tobago, and our government is almost like socialist. So, you know, other than workers' unions and stuff like that, we don't have very many like national-wide protests or anything like that. So it was very new to me, and I remember, and I know a lot of students would resonate with this. My parents were scared for me, you know, because the realities for Black people in America are very different from the realities for Black people in Trinidad and Tobago. And so they were like, you know, be safe and whatever. But for me, it was about supporting, you know, the people who were doing the work. I think even then it was very common for Black women and Black queer women to lead, you know, activism work, to lead affinity group work and that kind of thing. And so it wasn't any surprise that Christine spoke, or that the three people that's initiated the event are all Black women. And so in my own voice and in my identities, I felt it's important to also come forward and lend my voice to the movement. And honestly, yeah, that was my main drive. In terms of the atmosphere, I described this moment, the Amherst Uprising, for the entire three and a half days that I was there, to be one of the most sincere and organic moments of community that I've ever felt at Amherst College. I remember upstairs, the QRC had chosen a little nook that was a safe space for queer folk. There were different people like just, napping, camping out, having conversation. Um, and the energy changed over that period of time. But what I think was so startling about the uprising was that it was student-led, right? I think the administration does a lot of work in terms of trying to provide community for students, trying to sponsor that kind of community making. But this was completely organic, completely student-led. And what was also amazing was that staff and faculty fell in line, you know? It was student-led and staff and faculty came to listen. And the staff and faculty that didn't come to listen, we didn't allow them to speak, right? We kind of like determined the terms of engagement. And so it was just really empowering to see that we could have as much say as we had on that night, and that we could lend the support that we were lending. And the only other thing I would say is there was an emotional intimacy as well that I rarely ever experienced ever during my 4 years at the college. Like when people, during those 4 days, when people asked, "How are you?" you knew that they meant it, right? You knew that they were asking, "How are you in the context of the world? How are you related to the oppressions that you face? How are you related to what you're hearing in the library?" As people reflect, it was, people really started accounting for people's humanity in a way that I hadn't experienced before. And even professors were coming in and saying, "Okay, do you want to talk in class? Do we want to adjust the syllabus?" And that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm just really nostalgic and happy to be a part of it and to share what that was with you all. Yeah.
I see.
I could jump in for a second and would say that I wholeheartedly agree about the level of emotional intimacy and care that everyone exuded that day is like unprecedented, and you could feel like the energy was palpable, and it was like a fundamental shift in power regarding how Amherst was going to do things from that day forward. So once we got rolling, there was no way to stop. So it was so exciting and terrifying all at the same time.
I see. And I think Andrew has had the very difficult job of figuring out how to capture the emotional intimacy that everyone felt during those 4 days. Andrew, I don't know if you can share again, but I know this website is part of your work archiving Amherst Uprising, but could you tell us more and also talk about what faculty and other campus groups are doing to archive the movement?
Definitely, and thank you, Lola. My work on trying to archive the uprising has been really interesting and a really wonderful experience. I was really motivated because when I was a student, I was a sophomore during Amherst Uprising. I wasn't really knowledgeable of the history of student activism and protests on Amherst College campus. And looking back 5 years from now, if I had been more knowledgeable, I think it would have been really impactful for me as a freshman, as well as for me as a sophomore during the uprising. And so I was really motivated to figure out ways in which we can gather and hold the memory of Amherst Uprising to be empowering to current students, and to figure out how we can best pass that memory and history along. And so some of what I've been doing for this project has been to collect oral histories and written reflections and the actual words of the participants from Amherst Uprising together, and to kind of allow that to emerge as its own history, and to really think about how we tell student activism in the voices of those activists while they're around and while they're still present and engaged in this work throughout their lives. And so I'll walk through a little bit of what we've collected here. And to speak to another thing that you mentioned, Lola, about the work that current students are doing to continue to this archival work and continue this activist work. one of the things I had the pleasure of doing throughout this most recent couple months was to work with a course taught by Professor Hayashi of current students from Amherst in Hampshire. And they were considering similar questions of history and memory as it related to their lives as students on campus. And to be able to have their perspective of what current students needed and how they viewed and were being informed by the histories of activism on campus was really significant to this project. We were able to actually work together and collaborate on a timeline tracking anti-racist protests and activism on Amherst campus from even before Amherst Uprising, which was a really wonderful project to be able to have students be current students be at the lead of that archival research.
I see. And thank you for sharing all of this and especially showing us that map. And I just want to mention that we have Bella on the call now, who is a current student. And before we speak with her and have Biddy chime in as well, I just want to let everyone watching know that we will have a Q&A portion. So please feel free to send whatever questions you have into the Q&A chat, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Just to, okay, I see Austin. Thank you, Austin. Just in line with what you were talking about, Andrew, and the importance of empowering current students, Bella, I'd love to hear, I think all of the alumni and everyone in the audience would love to hear sort of how Amherst Uprising has affected you, and also what overlaps there are with the work you're doing now as a student activist.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all for having me. It's really cool to see you all, like to hear you speak about Uprising as the people who really, made it happen. We have like the people in my class, I mean, everyone at Amherst, but I feel like especially the people in my class have really like felt so connected to Uprising throughout our time at Amherst. But I think especially over these past few months, as like we're, the senior class feeling like a huge sense of leadership and just kind of like living in the world in the moment that we live in right now. So many of us empowered to really ask and demand for change, not only at Amherst, but just in the world for our lives. So I think in that way, we've definitely felt impacted. I felt personally impacted, just like hearing the stories and being inspired by what you all did. But I think also, just hearing you all talk about how like authentic of an experience it was. Like, I think Amir, you said organic. I think knowing like the history of this and how it came from such an honest place of wanting to obviously be in solidarity with the folks at Mizzou, at Yale, at all of these other schools, but also like coming from a place of pain too, like just needing to like get this out there to make it clear that while you can leave Amherst as a Black person, as a person of color, having made like really good friends and had good experiences, you don't always leave Amherst feeling super fond of it because of the things that can happen in the ways that that's not always addressed. So I think that has definitely impacted a lot of us, and I would say I think a lot of us feel really, I don't want to speak for everyone too, so I'll just speak for myself. I've definitely felt in the past few months, especially, that being fortunate enough to have this kind of like legacy and history such like important activism. It inspires you, but it also empowers you to ask and demand for more. I think just like knowing that in our, recent history, there were, all of you who did this like really incredible thing that saw like tangible change at Amherst has really like emboldened me to ask for the things that I think are important for the college to undertake, but also, I think has empowered me and other folks in my year, especially to keep like following up on those things. There is a precedent, that you all set that, the people that have come through Amherst, the Black and Brown people that have come through Amherst, who in their very existence have resisted. There's a precedent, for that kind of power, but also, just that persistence. And so I think that's kind of how I felt the most impacted by Uprising. Obviously, like the tangible change, but just the feeling of like empowerment that it gives you too. It makes me feel like we can do a lot, and that we're really powerful as students.
I see. And yeah, I think that speaks to the power of creating a historical record so that, students experiencing it, have their experience. And then also current students can look back and see and incorporate that into the work they're doing now. Biddy, I want to turn to you because you've been here throughout and you've seen, to use what Bella said, the persistence from the students. And I would love to hear you talk about what impact Amherst Uprising had on the college immediately and in the years following. Oh, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. I'm challenged on technology. I think it would really be impossible to overstate the impact that the Amherst Uprising had. And it can be demonstrated in all sorts of ways. I was thinking about it when Andrew asked me to do an interview with him for the website. And I was thinking about it again today. If I think just about the curriculum, the fact that there have been hires in Asian American studies, that there is now a Latinx major and program or department even, that we just hired a specialist in Black political thought who'll start next year, that the hiring of faculty of color over the past 5 years has picked up incredibly significantly. It's still nowhere close to what it needs to be for faculty to reflect the diversity of the student body. But the changes that have been made over the past 5 years amaze even me, even though I'm here, I've been here and have responsibility for trying to help make those things change. Also teaching, pedagogy. I'm thinking about some of the programs that emerged out of the Uprising. Sheila Jaswal's Being Human in STEM program, which is now a national model, or the new Science Incubator Project for primarily students coming from low-income backgrounds or students with less good high school backgrounds in science. These are creative programs that were inspired by what we learned from students during the Uprising. I'm thinking about athletics. Bella plays lacrosse and is president of the student group. 4 Black coaches were hired this past year. The percentage of students of color now on varsity teams has risen significantly enough for people to reflect on it, even in the New York Times, but again, not nearly enough. I'm thinking about the fact that we now have an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with Norm Jones heading it, who has made sure that the model at Amherst for change is a distributed model, and that every single division and every member of the senior staff and every manager is responsible for having goals specific to changing, not just making Amherst more diverse, but making it more inclusive, getting rid of what I think Christine talked about a few minutes ago, getting rid of the perception and the reality that there is a kind of core culture that is a legacy culture to which everyone else is marginal, and instead having multiple centers and no one center particularly, but a strong sense of community. And all of these things change slowly, but they're definitely changing. And when I credit Amherst Uprising, I don't do that just because it sounds good. Having lived through it, at least the parts of it after I got back from the trip I was going to go on, and having seen the impact it's had in small ways and in large, and seeing the work that current students are doing to make sure that it doesn't slow down and that we actually pick up steam, because it's easy to let things happen slowly or even not happen in institutions. So, I mean, again, I could not be more grateful. I think the impact is forever. And even if I think of my student days in the late 60s and 70s, and think about all the institutions at which I've taught and served in administration, I can't think of any event or any set of days that matches how special it was. Perhaps for the reasons people have already said, the honesty, the courage people had to talk openly about struggling with the fact that Amherst wasn't what it needed to be for everybody to feel they could thrive equally. And, but also the ideas that were created about how to make it change. And the sense of community, which has lasted, I think, in very important ways among students, but also between faculty and students. Anyway, I think when one sits back and thinks about the impact, it's quite amazing.
Yeah, it sounds like Amherst Uprising definitely forced the college to change in a number of ways. And I can only imagine, / I'm certain that the students behind Amherst Uprising have also changed the industries and fields that they are currently working in. And I would love it if each of you could maybe take a moment to talk about how Amherst Uprising affected the way you go about activism and how you chose a path. I know Bella is in a seat I don't miss in having to figure out what to do post-graduation. So hopefully that will also be helpful for her and for whoever else is a student about to graduate in pretty uncertain times.
I can definitely speak to that. And I think it makes sense to also pay homage and show acknowledgement to the staff and the faculty who were definitely in support for us at the time. It is no easy feat, as was said, that it was, as Amir said, it was a student-led protest, but it was something where our faculty and our staff members truly not only wanted to support us because we were their students, but to also highlight how these things were also real for them as well. I appreciated the first, the second, the last, and every in-between letter of solidarity that came from a department. In them not only just saying that they stood with us, but also what it meant for them practically and logistically for their departments to step up to also acknowledge that from an academic setting, that students who felt marginalized deserved to feel seen in certain aspects of the curriculum. So definitely want to acknowledge a lot of the professors who spent their weekend with us on campus and made sure that we did not allow for the fire that we felt to just diminish after one day, but to allow us to sustain the conversations. If it had not been for the professors and staff that were with us during that time, I don't think our movement would have been as sustained, because they truly inspired us to keep going. So I just wanted to say
Can I
that.
also add to that a little bit?
Of course.
In one of my experiences at the Amherst Uprising, I remember one staff member in particular, who I won't name, she came up to me and she gave me a really tight, warm hug. And she was almost in tears, and she said, thank you. She said, thank you like 7 times. Thank you for doing this, because we experience things too, and we can't do this, right? In a way, job security is a lot different from tuition payments, right? And so in a way that we were, yeah, like their support wasn't by chance. There was a reason, because I think we were doing that work on behalf of all marginalized people, regardless of where they were within the academic structure. And I think that's something to also to continue to think about as students and other people on campus are doing activism, is how can we as students in this empowered position also champion and protect and preserve the rights and freedoms of people on staff and people even in faculty, even though, you know, the power is different, of course. So yeah, I just wanted to add that because I feel like that's an important part too, is how can we as students include staff members in, you know, how we go about activism.
For sure. So to go directly to your question, Lola, the reason why I bring up professors is because I think professors highlighted a lot of the things in myself that I was sometimes too busy trying to achieve in a leadership position, or too busy trying to display in some sort of classroom or extracurricular activity, and realizing that the voice that in which that I choose to live in a classroom or live for a student organization that I was a part of could actually be sustained in the work that I wanted to do post-grad. And I had always seen myself as someone that always wanted to give back to the classes prior to me, having worked as a student orientation leader, constantly looking out for the students in the classes below me to ensure that they too were having a good transition in their experience. Not just to say that I was there for all the students, because I was, but also especially knowing when I came in as a black young woman, and making sure that I knew that I could look to the other Black women on campus. I wanted them to know that I could stand there as a student orientation leader for them as a Black woman, to say like, you can be here too. So then right after college, I made a conscious decision to take some time off. And I worked at a student nonprofit that particularly serves students of color in their transitions into independent schools in the New York City area. And if you aren't aware, the New York City independent schools are also predominantly white institutions. And I had been a product of those spaces as well. And so I took a year and a half to go back to an organization that actually propelled me into those spaces, to give back to those students, for them to see a face that wanted to be a liaison for them and their families, and ensuring that they could finish that part of their journey. And that if they ended up at a place like Amherst, they knew that they could do it there as well. And then I transferred into, I had always been engaged in like the entertainment and like music and like media spaces on campus, having had a radio show on campus that was solely centered on what it meant to be Black at Amherst. And that allowed me to have a podcast post-grad with Kristen as well, and working in that space as a brand strategist for a major media company, being able to be an editorial strategist in that time, but still bringing what it meant to be a Black woman to that space, because I was the only Black woman on my team at the time. And I knew that I wanted to sit at the intersection of what it means to help creatives of color see themselves in every aspect of what it meant for them to be on a screen, what it meant for them to live in a gallery, their work live in a gallery, what it meant for them to be on stage. And so I thought about it, I was like, how can, where is it that there's a lack or a dearth of our people in ensuring that creatives of color see fit? And that's why I decided to pursue law school in the way that I did, because ultimately, someone is not there supporting, just as we saw in the uprising, if someone is not supporting you that looks like you, you often feel like you're without. And so in doing this, I'm ultimately making a stand of being a social activist in the entertainment space by ensuring that when I'm standing next to a client who is a person of color and they're trying to make a negotiation with a company for their work to be realized and fully realized both in dollars and cents, that they know that they have someone who can help them along that way. And to allow for their careers to be fully realized and fully lived and accepted as such. And I think part of what Amherst Uprising showed me was that in advocating for myself in certain spaces, I can also advocate for others. And so that's what I hope to do with what I'm doing right now.
And I think your path post-college is emblematic of many paths that student activists take. So I want to use the rest of our time to get to some of the questions from the audience. We have a lot of good questions here. I think this first one would be good for Bella. So this is from Sophia Wolmer, and she asks, given the restrictions instituted by the college due to the pandemic, a sit-in and other forms of protests are no longer possible. How do you suggest that Amherst students continue advocacy work while also keeping in line with Amherst rules?
Thank you for that. Yes, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm not on campus. I'm in my home. So yeah, it definitely, even obviously for students on campus, that sort of gathering is impossible. But so many of us are, away from Amherst right now. So we definitely have had to be creative and resourceful in how we're still advocating. But I think, and also, as I said before, we're living kind of in this time where so many of us are even more empowered than ever to really do this sort of work and to really, be persistent, like I said. So I think in some ways it can be challenging because we don't have that same sort of, physical community with people. But I think like the use of social media has been a really important way for people to kind of try to replicate that sort of sense of community in doing advocacy work. Just being able to, all like share the same post or something like that. Or, obviously like interacting like through group messages and everything too, to like build the community that you kind of need to like rally around you in order to like really fight for these things, I think has been really important. And just like the best way of like spreading word too. Like we're all on our phones, even more so now than we were before the pandemic, which was, still a lot. But we're all like looking at our phones, we're all scrolling through Instagram, through Twitter, and people like, see what's out there. So I think that that's been something that's really important. Obviously, it's not the same as being able to gather with people in person, but it definitely is a way to get information out there. And I think in terms of just, kind of like making our voices heard to people outside of like just our community as students, I think a lot of us have, kind of just really felt like we have nothing to lose in a way. And so like, you know, we ask to like meet with people, we ask to have meetings, you know, we invite people to come to our like our club meetings, or to talk to our e-boards, and stuff like that. So I think a lot of it is about, you know, really like taking even more initiative, to like have those conversations. But in terms of like spreading the word and stuff, I think that social media has been a huge asset for a lot of people, as we're, you know, navigating this time.
I see. And I, just to go back to what Katyana mentioned earlier, about the Hampshire student who helped with Amherst Uprising. I know that they were very involved with social media and figuring out how to get messaging out to not only Amherst students, but others in the 5 colleges. I also want to stay with Katyana. There's a question from someone in the audience. And they want to know, they said, would you say that you faced any opposition during the movement or anyone trying to repurpose it?
That's a good question. I would say that I think because the sit-in was so emotional and there was just so much raw energy in the room that, you know, tensions were definitely flaring. People had a lot of different concerns and things that they wanted to be met. You know, everyone had different ideas about the approach and how we should go about, you know, talking to the administration, or, you know, some people are like, let's work with them. And some people are like, well, we can never do anything with the administration. And so, you know, it was a lot of conflict. And I think people, honestly, that 3.5 days in Frost and, you know, developing committees and things like that really, it was taxing, but it put a lot of the hard work on us to come together and work together like we, you know, we said we would, because a lot of the concerns that we had were similar. It's just that people, you know, are phrasing them in different ways, or have different, you know, specifications about how they want their college experience to be. Like I can remember, you know, some students were thinking that the demands, you know, were too harsh, where others were like they weren't enough. I think that, you know, we were able to find a middle ground, and people were like, you know, well, if you're, you know, downstairs and you're not really a fan of, you know, what the demands are, then come upstairs and talk to us, and let's, you know, speak with all the representatives of all the different affinity groups, and let's, you know, work this list out and crank it out together. So I do think in the end, it still was a very honest and respectful community building going on. But I do think that, you know, some student groups, you know, people could say that there was, because the focus initially was on Black students, you know, Black students. And then because there was so much overlap on the college, you know, with Black and Brown, we were like, okay, well, so Black and Brown and queer students were really the major groups that had been experiencing a lot of the discrimination and marginalization on campus. But there were other people who were like, you know, our problems matter as well. So, you know, we had to refocus and redevelop our strategies. And, you know, I think in the end, it all worked out, because, you know, there are some student groups, I think a lot of the Asian American students had a lot of energy and used that to kind of, you know, reinvigorate their student groups, and took that and have now, you know, increased their memberships exponentially. They're doing a lot of great work on campus. So I think in the end, it really, you know, played out in everyone's benefit for sure.
I see. Okay, well, I think a good place to end would be to actually take one more question from the audience. So this is from a fellow classmate, Takudzwa, and he wants to know, how have you, and this is for everyone to chime in, whoever wants to speak to chime in, how have you navigated the challenges of activism within the academic space versus the workplace or social environments as you transition across these? Are there question just disappeared. I think the rest of that question said, are there fundamental differences to navigating those? Sorry to Kudzwa.
That is a great question. I
Also,
think
Lola, oh, sorry. I was just going to say it's an answered. If you just click answered, it's right at the bottom. Yeah.
Okay, you know what? Thank you. Okay, are there fundamental differences in the approach? Great memory.
I think that, you know, and one thing that Amherst Uprising and the organizing that we, and, you know, all the follow-up afterwards taught me to have, you know, an absence of fear when you're talking about the things that you need, the things that you know, that you need to make you successful, make you able to thrive, and to make you be, you know, a fully realized Black person or student of color in the world. So I think that kind of outlook definitely is a positive to take into the professional space, because a lot of people didn't have this experience that we had at Amherst, and, you know, don't quite understand what it is that someone might need from, you know, from a particular background. But it's one thing I'm like, you have to ask. And I do this now in my current job, you know, working with individuals from disinvested communities. Is you know, I want to hear what you need. What do you need? What can I provide? You know, what can I help you with? How can we make the best use of resources to make sure that you're successful in whatever it is that you're doing? And always being sure to, you know, listen to people, and just taking that into a professional space, and always being kind of open to hearing what it is that people are needing, you know, from you, or what they have to contribute to the conversation. It is definitely an invaluable professional skill to have.
And I don't know if anyone else wants to answer that question, or there was also someone who wanted, you know, they heard Christine's path post-graduation, but if they're, and I know Katyana, you mentioned some of that. I don't know if you want to, Amir, and then just gonna turn it back to Biddy to close the event. Did what I just said say make sense?
Yeah, I think you said you were asking Amir to just share what he's been doing post-grad and how Amherst Uprising has connected to his current work.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so yeah, I think for me, it's been about trying to find the place for activism and artistic work. And that's been a valuable thing as well. Just as Katyana said, I think the principle of listening remains at the core of that, right? And another alumni over Instagram has been having really interesting conversations around this as well. Like, how do we, like, artistic work is inherently about, you know, self-promotion. How do we partner that with activism work, with social justice work? How do we use our platforms to highlight movements in different places? In a similar way to what Bella was saying, the digital social media has been a really important part of that. In terms of, like, you know, just using a digital platform to share, you know, different things that were going on. And then also, for me specifically, there's a difference between, you know, the social media stuff and then the in-person stuff. So in a project I was doing in Nigeria and in Trinidad with an alumni, Sheila Chukwulozie, what we did was as part of our art, we worked with different communities, for instance, with life imprisoned men in Nigeria. We also worked with a mental health ward in Trinidad, and those things weren't very public, but they were like small ways of contributing in the ways that we could to different things and different communities that we really cared about. And then in terms of the artistic place, I'm finding that it's really meaningful to, you know, do small things like contribute part of the proceeds of a show toward an organization that is meaningful to you or that's serving the community. And Biddy will talk more about this in a little bit, but the Solidarity book project that we're working on is also trying to figure out that balance, right, of how do we engage social media and our own platforms and participation in service of marginalized communities. So that's all I'll say about that, because I think Biddy will do enough of that. But yeah, it's been really interesting in terms of, because that's where I learned, Amherst Uprising was where I learned that principle of listening and what is possible when that undergirds all of your activism work. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh, I was just going to add something quick, just to say that, you know, post grad, I think everyone can see, especially now with given the racial injustice protests that happened over this past summer, is that, you know, when you get in the quote unquote real world, everything is magnified times 10. So it's like you have to be on and ready to go ahead and push up against that, and make sure that you're always, you know, open and looking through kind of a lens of empathy, for sure. And radical compassion. It was one of our slogans.
Right. I almost forgot about radical compassion. I mean, I didn't forget about it. I forgot about the slogan. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And I'm going to hand it over to Biddy now.
Well, I can't help saying that I wish it would go on longer. I would like to listen to you all longer. And just before closing, I want to say to you, Christine, that one of my most vivid memories of the uprising is the phone conversation we had on Friday afternoon. I had left the library after, I don't know, maybe midnight on the night before, and wasn't sure what the next steps would be. And I just remember calling you on the phone. I don't know how I got your phone number, but anyway, I remember our meeting thereafter so vividly. What extraordinary leaders you all were and are. And I just want to thank you again, because I don't think I could emphasize too many times the impact it's had. And I'm really glad to hear the impact it's had on you all as you go forward and make change wherever you're working and living now. Next week on Thursday, so the 19th, there's another event that the college is sponsoring. It's part of the Amherst Uprising Anniversary Series, and it's going to be a discussion with professors, students, and alumni, recent alumni in particular, about being human in STEM, about Sheila Jaswal's, and now not only her, but other faculty's work in this space. It's, as you all, I think, know, HSTEM is about trying to build an inclusive and supportive STEM community in the classroom, in the lab, and beyond. It has, as I said, become a national model. It's being used at Yale, Utah, Davidson College, Williams College, that place way up in the north. But November 19th is also the launch date for the Solidarity Book Project that we've alluded to several times. And I hope you'll tune in next week, because I think this is really an extraordinary project that Professor of Art and History of Art, Sonia Clark, is doing with the help of Andrew and Amir. Its purpose is to create a celebration of the bicentennial of the college, but by doing the work of building solidarity with Black and Indigenous communities. And that's how Sonia and I think Amir see the project. The details of it are going to be announced during this Being Human in STEM event next Thursday. It starts at 8 p.m. And I hope that everybody who's on this call will join that event as well. In the meantime, I just want to thank you all. Thank you, Lola, for great moderating. Thanks to all of you for making time to talk about your memories and experiences. Thanks for the changes you've brought about. I wish you all really well in what you're pursuing now. It sounds like you're all doing wonderful work, as you would be. And I miss you. So hope to see some of you soon. I ran into Amir at a restaurant not that long ago, right before the COVID shutdown. So I've seen him, I've seen Lola, but Katyana, I haven't gotten to Memphis, but if I ever do, I hope I can call you. Christine, I haven't seen you, but maybe when I'm in DC, I will. Andrew, I saw for the interview, and it just is so moving to me to see what you're all doing and get to experience the way your leadership carries on. So thank you. And Bella, I'll see you tomorrow. Wonderful. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.